You are Locked On Hawks Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to yet another episode of the official Atlanta Hawks Postcast. It is me, DeShaun Tate, with you guys here on the evening, kind of breaking down this game, the 36th game of the regular season for the Atlanta Hawks. Unfortunate set of circumstances coming down to a resulting 131-105 loss for our Atlanta Hawks, and definitely going to jump into quite a few different things on today's show. We're going to kind of start things out with talking about taking a little bit of a step in Quinn Snyder's shoes, maybe what type of things maybe would have been more so your motivating, your inspiring, your just the determinating factor of which you would have prep talk your guys going into this particular game. Obviously, everybody knows that Kawhi Leonard coming back for his season debut on tonight. And so what would have been your conversation going into the game? What would have been your conversation at the half? So we'll get into that in the first segment. And then in the second segment, kind of, talk a little bit about the make or break. As you can see it there, just more so about, how these losses, being 3 consecutive now for the Atlanta Hawks, impacts them potentially against what could be considered a quote unquote, if you're not paying attention and watch what you're doing, trap game against the Utah Jazz on Tuesday evening. So we'll talk about that some, and of course wrap things up with what kind of things to avoid going into that road game against the Utah Jazz. But not before we let you guys know that this particular episode of the Locked On Hawks Postcast is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers, of course, can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. Let's jump right into it, folks, because, I know that we're obviously talking about, this didn't feel like it was necessarily just any game. I know that this is one that the Los Angeles Clippers certainly had gotten up for. I guess that's just one way of putting it. They're showing off their fancy Nancy arenas and all that I'm like to call it. And getting Kawhi Leonard back is obviously going to put a whole different type of emotional spin on this, kind of motivating them and inspiring them to play good basketball, and got some really good pieces. I know the elephant in the room is probably going to be James Harden to go along with that, who didn't particularly have a great game, but even one of the more improved players in the NBA. And we'll talk about some of those from the Atlanta Hawks as well, but that being Norman Powell. So I think one of the first things that I'm looking at here is just how the Atlanta Hawks could not really afford to put themselves in a position, first and foremost. Whenever you're talking about wanting to win a basketball game, you always have to have that ball protection. Obviously, the turnovers were far too many, 23 for them on the evening. And anytime that, you are giving the ball to the other team, I tell people all the time, I'd much rather be in a position to where, I have the 50-50 chance at making or missing the shot versus to give the ball to the other team and giving them a chance at 2 or 3 points, sometimes even 4 if it's a 4-point play. So I don't think that helped them out on tonight. And that's just kind of been an ongoing thing. And I know sometimes it feels like we don't necessarily talk about, at least my opinion, we don't necessarily talk about that nearly as much, talk about the turnovers, but that is something that can hurt you. Like for the games that Atlanta has lost, I think 18 now, 3 consecutive. I have had a chance to do all the calculations, and I'm sure that we'll do that when Tanisha gets back next week. But, of these 18 losses, how many of them potentially could have been different just based off of, just a couple turnovers or a couple things that, didn't seem that they had went the way that the Atlanta Hawks, or just the unforced errors sometimes. A lot of times I think more so than anything is something that I see within this team that I think that they can avoid. And sometimes that just kind of add fuel to the fire a little bit, insult to injury, when it's the unforced turnovers, the ones you don't have to make. It's not necessarily because the other team is playing that great of defense. And I see that a lot with this Atlanta Hawks team. And I know that you're kind of going to have that sometimes, especially with the usage rate or how often the ball is in Trae Young's hands and his responsibilities and duties as a point guard to get the ball where it's supposed to go in difficult positions, sometimes in traffic or whatever, what have you, being the top guy assistant in the NBA. Obviously, there's a positive spin on that, but obviously you got to look at the turnovers from that standpoint as well. Very few times do you see a guy who is elite in that particular department who doesn't have, the turnovers, maybe not saying as many as Trae does, but it's kind of like the risk versus the reward. Sometimes it's going to work out for you, sometimes it's not. And so I do think that that is definitely a little bit of a misconstrued thing that we tend to not look at. Just the positive side, how well he does from an assist standpoint, but not as much talk about not only his turnovers, but just the team's turnovers in general as well. We've seen this Atlanta Hawks, LA Clippers team kind of get out to a 16-0 run in the first quarter. And then turn around in a 12-0 run against the Hawks in the second quarter. If this is, and you, I don't have to break it down. You guys seen the game. If you are Quinn Snyder in these situations, you're going into the game, you get the word that, Kawhi Leonard's coming back. You don't have Jalen Johnson yet again after a couple nights ago in the game against the Lakers. You don't have Bogey Bogdanovic, another guy who played against the Lakers that you don't have. Two of those guys didn't play the game prior. And then, obviously we know that you don't have Larry Nance. In this particular situation, in a game like this, you need as much as you can get. Larry Nance, the whole nine, doesn't make a difference, doesn't matter. But what is the conversation? Because, you got this new fancy Nancy Dome and Intuit Dome. It's kind of like a college atmosphere, if you will. Kind of reminds me of, when you see those games, all these places I haven't been to, but the Duke and Purdue, Kansas, Arkansas, Indiana, Auburn on the collegiate basketball level kind of reminds me of that. When you're looking at the NBA game, OKC, the whole, light the arena or light the dome or light the sky or whatever it's called, light the beam for Sacramento, obviously, when they're playing well, those being home games, those raucous crowds, if you look at it that way, Boston, New York, obviously, and Milwaukee. This is one that I think for the LA Clippers that's going to be really tough for the opposing teams, especially at the free throw line, where I think the opposing team this season, the Clippers are number one in teams going to the free throw line, going to the charity stripe at their home place there in Inglewood. So, like, all of these things factoring in, everybody's juiced up, everybody's pumped. What is the conversation? What does that conversation look like? What are you telling the guys? What are you telling the players? You know that you're without, two starters or potential starters, one for sure, Bogey coming off the bench, but he's good enough to be a starter. You're not having Larry Nance. You need all you can get. What is your conversation with these guys? I'm not really sure that there's really a ton that you can really say. And I know you got to find something mustered down in there somewhere to find some type of, fire starter, light the fire up under their bellies and really get those guys going. But, I think the main thing is it appears, especially in these last few games, that the conversation has been to get out early and start running. Getting shots up from three early and often. I thought that was something that really needed to happen if the Atlanta Hawks wanted to find a way to get a victory in a game like tonight. Like, we're just being really transparent. I didn't think that their chances were really that good. And that's before learning about Kawhi Leonard not being able to that was returning back to action on tonight. But it wasn't even just necessarily about Kawhi Leonard, although his numbers look pretty good. 12 points, 3 rebounds, 4 for 11 from the field. He had 3 threes. I think hit 3 threes, 3 for 5 from 3, and 3 of them consecutively before he ended up missing the next 2. But They definitely needed to let it fly and shoot the leather off the ball, shoot the cover off the ball. What I don't think that they could afford to happen in this situation is in the front court. And I think we've been having too many of these conversations as well. And I get it. Onyeka Okongwu coming back from injury recently and kind of getting him back into the groove of things and so forth. But the combination between he and Clint Capella, 10 points, 15 rebounds, these are numbers that I expect just one of those guys to get per night. And I'm not saying literally every single night like they're going to average that per night, but on nights like this is where you need that, especially when you have somewhat of mismatches against guys like Zubac, right? The bench, as much as, and this is the crazy part that I think about it, and I'll get back to some of the keys going into the game that I had going in, but in order for the Hawks to win, but I really thought that the Atlanta Hawks got beat in ways that, much like on yesterday with the Los Angeles Lakers, that they had used themselves to be able to defeat some of the other teams. We start looking at the bench, outscored from a bench standpoint, and I get it, everybody's not healthy, but 69-46, and that's just bench contribution for the Los Angeles Clippers. And I mean, everybody knows, unless you've been living under a rock, you haven't been paying attention, that the Los Angeles Clippers is one of the best teams in the NBA from an on-paper only standpoint, right? We understand that things tend to look different in the playoffs, especially when you have guys like James Harden leading the way. You have Paul George on last year. I understand, or overstand rather, that you don't have him this year. However, it's a little bit, different when you had him in the lineup at one point in time, but none of those guys were able to see the floor at the same time, especially with Kawhi Leonard being out as often as he was. But you have to teach them that they have to establish some kind of chemistry amongst one another as well. Things tend to look good on paper all the time. A lot of different things look good on paper entering the game, but things can look totally different when you actually step on that floor. That didn't happen for the Clippers tonight. They look like a well-oiled machine. They look like they've been healthy all season. They got everybody in the game. They got everybody, looks. Got out there in the open court in transition against the Atlanta Hawks. Another way that the Atlanta Hawks is used to beating teams when they're adding a number to the left side of the result column. Add in the fact that the Atlanta Hawks typically do a good job not only from the bench, but dumping the ball inside some of those paint points as well. 40-74 from a paint point standpoint. And I think that for a 29-point lead for the Los Angeles Clippers, it got out of hand really early and just the momentum got going. I thought that the Hawks really needed to do a fine job at taking the crowd out of the game relatively early, and obviously that happens by hitting big shots, and they didn't shoot terribly, I don't think, from three, but yet still it just still wasn't enough. And I felt like they really needed to dismiss the crowd in that particular situation. They needed to be providing an answer for everything that the Clippers did, and obviously that goes into punching back as well. And just kind of, converting on their attempts. There just has to be some balance as well in that particular department. And then, of course, I don't think that they could really afford any less than a B+ performance from, at very worst case scenario, from guys like David Roddy, DeAndre Hunter, who looked better on tonight. Talking about Hunter, 18 points. Still a little bit of a tough night shooting, but it seems like these last, 3 games, and specifically on this losing streak, obviously, that the opposition has kind of been doing their homework a little bit differently on DeAndre. And I think it's inevitable that at some point you're kind of going to come away with, some bad games from time to time. And I think that we're seeing that. Hopefully, fingers, toes, I's, T's, and everything else crossed that won't be the case when we enter Utah on Tuesday. But it is something that can happen. It's natural, right? We just really needed DeAndre Hunter in these moments, not only because of the players that the Hawks didn't have because of injuries in some of them, but because these are some of the biggest stages. We are talking about LA. We are talking about a really good, Denver team that won a championship recently. Another team that's contending for a championship this year in the Los Angeles Clippers. So, the Clippers definitely did themselves quite the fine job as well against a player who, like Norman Powell, who's one of the most improved players in the NBA this year, biggest surprises in the NBA this year, maybe most impressive guys in that conversation. I know DeAndre Hunter's probably in that conversation as well, but certainly didn't look nearly like it as much on tonight. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens when the Clippers visit State Farm Arena. Let's go ahead and jump to a break real quick here. On the other side, we'll talk a little bit about make or break, a little bit about the impact that these last three games on the last three games from of the consecutive losses that we've seen, again, against Denver, against the Lakers, against the Clippers. How has that kind of impacted, if any, if at all, this Atlanta Hawks team getting ready to go into a game where I don't feel like they can really afford to overlook the Utah Jazz? We'll talk about that here in just a second on the other side of this break. As we most recently just flipped the page to a new chapter from the 2024 calendar year and into 2025, that could only mean so many things, starting with the elephant in the room, New Year's resolutions. And because it seems like price inflation on pretty much, well, just about everything, who couldn't use some extra cash? I mean, everyone's looking to get some of those holiday tokens back, especially as we near the end of the NFL regular season. Insert here the perfect solution. That is FanDuel. It's not too late to place some bets, parlays, over unders, point spreads, etc. So if you've been searching for a home and don't feel like waiting until the tax season for a little more in the pocket, look nowhere else other than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown. I know I'm gonna be looking forward to a big time game on tomorrow to determine who gets the #1 spot in the NFC with my Detroit Lions, and of course going against the Minnesota Vikings. How many points each team will score? So much more, so many more things other than that. All you got to do is one simple thing. Very, very simple. Simple and plain and simple. Just visit fanduel.com to join today. That's fanduel.com for your chance at 250 big ones in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Getting back to it here on the other side, kind of obviously talking a little bit about the unfortunate loss for the Hawks. That's 3 in a row now, 131-105 at the Intuit Dome at the hands of the Kawhi Leonard. Now got him back. James Harden as well. Los Angeles Clippers, and it's one of those. It's one of those things where the Atlanta Hawks is definitely in position to where I think that they can certainly help themselves by going up against Utah. It seems like it's perfect timing. If there's no such other thing as time as perfect timing, this certainly seems to be coming at the right time. But definitely don't want to overlook those guys. Let's go to the comments here real quick and chop it up with a couple people. Got some regulars in here that come through and show some love. Appreciate you guys for coming through on a late night tip. Too many injuries on the Hawks. I definitely agree with that. I think that everybody would pretty much say that. And not just about the injuries for the Hawks, but also about the fact that it's coming at the timing that it is. A West Coast road trip where you probably need, you don't have a crowd to rely upon. And maybe, I mean, I get it. Nobody in the crowd is putting points on the board. But I think that any athlete can tell you that home court advantage to a degree is something that kind of helps you in terms of building a little bit of momentum, kind of helps guys go the extra mile, kind of push a little bit more, kind of dig a little bit deeper, and things like that. And when you don't have that on the road, you're far away from home, and the according to or what you're accustomed to being the time zone is totally different. The weather is totally different. Everything, life is just totally different in that particular standpoint. So I don't think that any of those things necessarily help. Certainly the injuries, I think, is one that you can't really afford at this current time. And I don't know. We'll see what happens with the remainder of the West Coast road trip. Got about 2 more games, I think, remaining on that. Utah and against Phoenix. Ironically and coincidentally enough, the Utah game happening when it is 4 players out playing back-to-back. The Clippers wore them down. The back-to-back thing didn't help. I know that the Hawks are 3-3 entering the game, 3-4 now in terms of the second games of the back end of a back-to-back. That's something that doesn't necessarily help either. It seems like everything is going against the Hawks' way right now, but that's just life, right? That's the up and downs of life. That's the up and downs of a season. Wasn't too long ago, the Atlanta Hawks were on a 6-game win streak. Wasn't too long ago, everything was looking great, and the Hawks are on a 4-game win streak. And I don't think that this necessarily breaks them. I think the Hawks have done a great job by sticking to their bread and butter, if I'm just being really transparent. And so I think that's a much better thing than people realize sometimes, is how good it is to see the Atlanta Hawks continuing to play their brand of basketball. Not necessarily great in the way of which the turnovers have been coming, but certainly trying to get out in transition, trying to get a lot of threes up, still trying to play tough on the defensive side, even if things don't necessarily always go their way. Still seeing some consistency out of a guy like a Garrison Matthews, 15 points, 8 rebounds on tonight, shot 40% from 3, kind of like an unsung hero a little bit for the team on tonight. 20 points, 14 rebounds. 20 points, 14 assists from Trae Young on tonight, obviously. And a lot of that seems like it maybe didn't mean a whole lot on tonight. But nonetheless, make no mistake about it, the numbers are the numbers. But I think that the main thing is that this isn't something that will break them or break their confidence just because of the fact that they know who they are. They have an identity. That's something that I think has really helped this team in its wins, obviously, but even more so in its losses, to know that you're on the right page. Everybody in life puts themselves in positions where they're trying to just do the best that they can and follow along the path of optimism and positivity and just doing the right thing and seeing results come from that. I think is something that makes it hit a little bit different when you're able to see, even when things aren't going your way, that you're still doing things the right way. You're still being competitive. You're still punching back, and you are not just getting taken advantage of. Like the Hawks, the scores have been looking bad, but it doesn't look like people have been all out treating them like some of the worst teams in the NBA. I still see them fighting every single night. And obviously that's a good way to look at it and something good to have, because not even some of the better teams in the NBA, I don't think, even have that type of mentality or even have that type of identity within themselves. Jamal, appreciate you for coming through as well on the late night tip, man. Just saw the final. Hopefully the Hawks can bounce back from the past few losses. Go Hawks. Love the postcast as always. Appreciate you for coming through and showing some love. That means a lot, obviously. And I'll tell you what, we are going to get ready to shoot here to just another break real quick, but I do want to talk about what it is that we have to look forward to making sure that we avoid as a team going in this game against the Utah Jazz. And I think that one thing that kind of helps a little bit is that they have some time on their side, a little bit of a break, a few days even, something that's desperately needed. But within that, what do they need to avoid? We'll talk about that a little bit later on the other side of this break. I remember pretty vividly. My first time purchasing on Game Time, looking for some tickets. I think I was going to the Duke in North Carolina game, something like that. I love my college basketball, and I was a little bit skeptical because the price tickets were so high, but I was looking for somewhere that I could purchase at because it was the last game of the Duke, Coach K at Duke, and I was trying to figure out where can I go, who can I trust. These are like $5,000 a piece per ticket. And I really wanted to do something really, really nice and go to a place and see this game, something that had been on my bucket list forever. So I didn't want to just shop with anybody. I ended up deciding to shop with Game Time, and it was so easy and simplified. Even had a chance to go check out a couple games with a couple buddies of mine, and they needed some recommendations and figure out, which way they would want to go. And there's all these different options. Everybody's heard of it before. Obviously, there's only one that is the most trustworthy. Nothing was overly complicated. All of my friends were impressed by how easy it was to navigate throughout the app, and with only the lowest prices guaranteed. Got virtual views as well of the game from our seats to be, and they even provided some top tier customer service. So if you're anything like my mom and have a ton of questions, that is something that obviously can be very helpful and be very beneficial as well. So it's all about taking the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. All you have to do is very simple. Again, plain and simple, simple and plain. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Again, Locked On NBA for $20 off of that first purchase. Let them know that I sent you, DeShaun, here at the official Locked On Hawks postcast. Of course, the terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code Locked On NBA, LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? It's game time. Rounding out the show here, appreciate everybody for checking us out. Make sure you check us out on all social media platforms as well. Talk a little bit about, I kind of teased it a little bit in the previous segment about what to avoid in Salt Lake. And I think that there's a few different things here. Obviously, more players getting injured. That probably has to be somewhere really high up on the list. In addition to just not overlooking them. I think that's something that is very, very critical because, as anybody will tell you, much like football, any given Sunday, everybody out here are professionals. And, when you are, and I remember this kind of being the case to a degree prior to for the Atlanta Hawks at one point in time, as to where they were the team that looked like they were always getting picked on. They were the team that were rebuilding. They were the team that were so young. They were the team that was scratching and clawing, doing any and everything that they could to be competitive, especially when teams came into State Farm Arena, or at that particular time, Phillips Arena, in which they were just trying to catch maybe some teams off guard. They're coming off of some really difficult games. really in search for a win, or they've been rolling high, maybe not paying you a lot of attention. Guys been at the gentleman's club the night before and just kind of looking at Atlanta like it's just kind of like a pass through, right? Just like a stopover to a degree, like a layover. Everybody's laying over in Atlanta, like a little layover. And that was the Hawks at that time, and I saw how competitive they were. But one thing that's always kind of intrigued me about this team that I was looking forward to is when they become that team that's not necessarily like the young Hawks, the young dogs, the young boys, the young guns. What is it going to look like when they are more so of the more mature team, or the more veteran-led team than someone else? And that is kind of the position that the Utah Jazz is in. They're the young guns now. And so it looks a little bit different now, but you better believe that they're going to give their very, very best shot. I think they've got 8 wins on the season. I think Atlanta has like 10 more wins than they do. And Utah really kind of look like they're entering the Cooper Flag sweepstakes, if I'm just being honest. And so, this is not one that you want to lay an egg, especially going into the Phoenix game. I think that the Utah game came at a really good time, not just because Phoenix is up after that, but because of what the Atlanta Hawks had recently endured. They're in a good position because they obviously get what I think about 72 hours of time to maybe be able to catch up on some rest. I'm sure there'll be some shoot arounds and some practices and whatever else, what have you. But speaking of practice, probably, some good walkthrough stuff. Not that the guys are tired by any means. You definitely want to, practice hard. I'm not saying try to avoid that by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that it is very important to maybe correct some things between the ears, specifically the turnovers, and just focus on guys getting healthy. Make sure nobody's getting injured in any of those practices, because that's not something that you can necessarily avoid. So I'm going to jump into the comments here for a quick second. You guys feel free to jump into the comments with me. We got probably about a minute or two left here on the show. So definitely want to find out from some of you guys, what are some of those things that you feel like maybe that the Atlanta Hawks cannot afford in this game coming up against the Utah Jazz in Salt Lake? What are some of the things that they need to make sure that they're avoiding in this game? And got Jamal jumping in here in the chat saying, yeah, it would be nice to get a win in Utah. Gonna need it before the Suns game to avoid. Okay, yeah, win versus win road trip for sure. And listen, I think that also, and I'm gonna close out with my remarks on this. I need to see more in the front court from the Hawks. I know we always talk about the hungry hippo thing and dumping the ball inside, but I need to see more than just lobs. And I know that these aren't, I know that Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu are not necessarily the most skilled guys back to the basket. I know we're kind of done with that, but I don't want everything to sometimes seem as if it's so easy to telegraph the passes and everybody knows that the lob is coming. I think eventually there will be opponents that will kind of catch on to that to some degree, right? And I think that there need to be some situations where, there is some high ball screens up top to make it a little bit easier. Obviously, Trey can get to the line so easily with being able to throw up the floater and what have you. But I need to also see, outside of guys getting healthy, and not sure that I anticipate guys being back in enough time from a health standpoint, because if there's a time to rest some guys, this sounds like it's the one. But I need to see DeAndre Hunter get back into that consistent, persistent DeAndre Hunter form all over again. And appreciate you, Robert. Rebounding, they have to win that. Of course, got to win the rebounding battle. Of course, Clint Capella, one of the better offensive rebounders in the game. And then, of course, Jamal Martin saying, don't let the random role player go off in the Utah game. Definitely can't afford that. If you can't afford nothing else, you definitely can't let the random role player go off. And if you do, you better be locking up some of the other guys that you have out there, the Lauri Markkanens and Colin Sextons, and make sure those guys aren't killing you in addition to the random role players. Just don't let the random role players. One thing to not let the random role players go off and have good games. Another thing to make sure they don't go off and have good games in addition to the other key contributors on the team and then end up with a win. And now you're talking about a 4-game losing streak going into Phoenix of all places, trying to get back home to Atlanta at State Farm Arena. Appreciate you guys for showing some love, coming through. Of course, it's late night, so I know that the folks is out there. A lot of people have tapping in with us right now. I'm going to tap in with us in the future. Appreciate you guys as well. Circle back on 72 hours from now, the Utah game, and I can't wait. Looking forward to it. Hopefully, we'll be talking about it, and likely we'll be talking about an Atlanta Hawks win. Signing off, DeShaun Tate, the official Locked On Hawks postcast. Good night.